Welcome to the live stream here on the BiohackerPT broadcasting network. Now, I wanted to go ahead and welcome you back. We are here again for another week. Now, we missed many days this week, but Friday we made it. We made it through the week. And I have a special topic that we're going to discuss tonight in order to look at how to treat pain. How do you treat pain? Isn't pain a symptom? Do physical therapists treat pain? Well, when you go to the clinic, you want pain relief, don't you? You want pain treatment. But when we twist it around and say treatment of pain, people kind of like, I'm not quite sure if you can do that or not. But we're going to look tonight at how we can treat pain through an approach. This is a more focused approach, not this immune type of response, but we're going to look specifically at the different roles of how emotions affect pain and how can we address that. In physical therapy, we don't really necessarily look at emotions at times, but it plays a critical role in not only immunity, not only inflammation, but also with pain. So I want to welcome you here to this broadcast on a Friday evening, an unusual night for this topic, but we will look at the end at our mission here. Join me tomorrow in my broadcast on the vegan kitchen, that is dealing with a nutrition biohack, a nutrition PT hack, straight from the kitchen of Mommy Jean and Kanita, looking at Thai and Filipino vegan dishes, demonstrations, and how we can do the taste tests and see how tasty it is. All right, I'm sure you will want to join that. That is Pacific time around 4 o'clock. All right, so that's the preparation and meal time. Now, during this past week, I've been doing different research on different things. I was going to talk about rebounding and how that affects the lymphatic system. I was going to talk about more specifically with different neurotransmitters or hormones, specifically testosterone, actually. We were looking and seeing how much research is out there on how testosterone therapies can help decrease pain, and there is some information that's out there. However, I was somewhat sidetracked. I was sidetracked because someone at my work over the past few weeks has been getting under my skin. Now, that is almost literal, because one of the things that I struggle with is atopical dermatitis, a condition called eczema. Now, psoriasis is more of an autoimmune disease. However, there are characteristics of hyperimmunity with eczema. Now, I've been doing all these things, from exercising specifically, trying to do high intensity interval training, trying to do nitric oxide dump exercises, trying to do rebounding and jump rope for improving my lymphatic flow, standing or sitting on a grounding mat, something that can help for immunity. I've been putting creams, lotions, oils, been dealing with the right type of water intake, the water as it flows over my skin through a water filter on the shower. Been having this special herbs and spices specifically for anti-inflammation, having the correct diet, getting the proper sunlight, maybe not getting enough rest, but making sure I have my blue light filters that help me through the night and guide me through the day. The special lights for biohacking, waking up in the night with the red light instead of the fluorescent light or the LED lights or some of the other lighting that is out there, the CFLs. Going through the process of fresh air, deep breathing, the Wim Hof breathing techniques, making sure that I have some sort of support system with family. I've done all these things, but I had a terrible flare-up this week. And why is that? What trumps all of this? I would say someone getting under my skin, if you know what I mean. How does that affect my immunity? How does that affect my inflammation? How does it affect my pain? Or my specific autoimmune or hyperimmune condition? It trumps all of that. And I'm back to the itching, the flaking, the irritation. So what can we do to get rid of that? How can we decrease the anger, the anxiety, the stress, the sadness, more or less, the emotions, those negative emotions that tend to have a wave over us and diminish or even delete all our efforts? How can you take yourself out of that? How can you solve the problem? The person is still there, irritating you day after day. What do? You have to deal with that. Not like I have. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the specific things that could be helpful. And I'm going to challenge myself as I challenge you, that you might be able to have better health, better immunity, better inflammatory control, better pain relief. All right. So we welcome you to chat with us on the screen, or even use the voice on my Discord server. It's the BiohackerPT #7376. Join me as I go through this research. So let's take a break now and just pause for a moment. And let's delve into the main event. Again, we're looking at the pain connection. What is the connection for what we are talking about? How does it relate to applying things in our own life? These hacks, more or less, for our own health. This is a little bit of the structural approach and the functional approach. Now I'm almost on the cusp of a different approach, a biopsychosocial approach, would you say? This biopsychosocial approach is what we're looking at today. And I'm not an expert at that, nor any physical therapy is. However, it's such an important aspect that it trumps all that we do. And it needs to be addressed and also explored. All right. So we're going to try to see if we can move the pace a little bit here and talk specifically at affective immunology. What is that? All right. Now I'm looking at those specific things I mentioned earlier. Those things such as anger, anxiety, stress, sadness. All right, we're going to look at that in our research today. Now we're looking at our search engine. Now remember, our search engine is important to look at, as it is dealing with pushing past the censorship. And that is a main thing right now in the news, trying to get the news out without being censored. Even if it isn't news, we should have freedom to choose the data and the information that we need to know. We don't belong in a totalitarian state. We don't belong in George Orwell's 1984. All right, so this is the search engine that we're looking at, the Joshua search engine. We're putting the information anger, inflammation, immunity, and pain at the end of October 2020. So we look at this and we see different topics. Now we'll open things up as we go, and we will probably go through quite a few articles here in the amount of time that we have. I'll say we have maybe about 40 minutes to get through this topic and see if we can get as far as we can. Now, this specific article is not necessarily a research-based article. That's the first one that comes up. We're looking for ones that actually have research in them. So this does not. This is actually speaking more about the concept that the body is in a state of hyperactivity or being angry. So it says here, this broader approach treats the underlying chemical imbalances behind chronic pain. With many chronic pain conditions, there is an underlying inflammatory state, in other words, a hyperactive or angry immune system. If this inflammation imbalance is present, diet and nutrition can play an important role in pain control. All right, so it's talking about some things right away, of things to address the pain. Now, we want to go ahead now and not just talk about this angry immune system, this hyperactive immune system. And one moment here, I'm going to just do a little bit of change here. With the screen, I know it's flickering right now. It's probably driving some people batty. And it'll probably drive me batty too, once I look at it later and see all the shadowing. We'll try the best we can. And this is the problem with live, I think. All right, I think that should be fine. Okay. All right. So let's go to the next article, and maybe that has a little bit more juice to it. All right. So this one here, anxiety, not anger, induces inflammatory activity. Now, I kind of skipped over that as well because it's not specifically with anger, but we're looking at also anxiety, any negative type of emotion. All right, this is dealing with anxiety. Anxiety, not anger, induces inflammatory activity and avoidance approach model of the immune system activation. Now, anger would be avoidance, and anxiety would be actually one is, because anxiety would be avoidance and anger would be approach model. All right, so this one here, it does have a citation in 2015 right here. This article that deals with this. Now we're going to quickly go through this. I like this because it has, even though it's looking at specifically more anxiety as triggering the inflammatory activity, psychological stressors reliably trigger systematic inflammatory activity as indices or indexed by levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines. This experiment demonstrates that one specific emotional reaction to a stressor may be a significant determinant of whether an inflammatory reaction occurs in response to that stressor. Based on extent correlation evidence and theory, a causal approach was used to determine whether the avoidance emotion, anxiety, triggers more inflammatory activity than the approach emotion, anger. All right, so we're looking at those specific ones. So they looked at 40 individuals here with this, that looks like a three-way emotion condition time analyte and action revealed that writing-based anxiety induction but not writing-based anger induction increased mean levels of interferon gamma, interleukin beta, 1 beta, but not interleukin 6 in oral mucosa. Okay? So it's just talking about basically that anxiety is affecting it more than anger in this specific experiment. All right. Further, self-reported state anxiety predicted elevated levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines, but self-reported anger did not. These results constitute the first evidence to our knowledge that specific negative emotions can differentially cause inflammatory activity and support a theoretical model explaining these effects based on avoidance or approach motivations associated with emotions. Now, I'm not quite sure if I believe that, because I've read other research that says other things, and that tie in anger, anxiety, sadness, and stress. Specifically, stress has been noted way back in the 60s and 70s with some research, and we know that. Eustress, distress, and the like. All right, let's look at the next one here. Let's look specifically at this one here. Emotions like anger and sadness may cause pain as well as being a result of it. So it's saying that it's not necessary that anger is because or causing issues that cause pain, but actually the pain causes the anger and the sadness. All right, let's see if we can get the whole screen here, and it's being cut off as we speak. While emotions such as anger or sadness are often thought as being a result of stress or pain, findings recently published in Penn State researchers suggest that negative or mixed emotions could function as stressors themselves. So in this psychological report on September the 6th, I believe it was September 6th and 2018 in this article, and I have the references that I'll be putting underneath as we read along. You can go to that, and this is more of a summary of this, not necessarily the article itself, but it does give a good explanation of this. The manuscript published by the journal Psychological Reports on September 6 examines the relationship between emotion and pain among women with RA. Now remember that RA is a sort of, or it is a autoimmune disease, all right? It is an autoimmune disease. Let's see if I can back this up to improve that shadowing. All right, we'll see if that works. All right, so we often think of emotion as a consequence of stress or pain, but our findings suggest that under certain circumstances, negative emotions or complex, mixed emotions can function as stressors itself, and one can promote inflammation, said Jennifer Graham Engelin, Associate Professor of Biobehavioral Health and lead author of the manuscript. So they hypothesized, the colleagues of hers as well as herself, that inflammation is physiological phenomenon. I'm going to keep on saying psychological, but the physiological phenomenon for which biomarkers from blood can be obtained may be connected to emotion and pain. All right. They developed a novel methodology and used it to test how emotions such as anger, sadness, or happiness affect inflammatory response to pain stimulus. The more we understand the connection between emotion and pain, the more we can develop newer options for treatment, as well as bolster the argument that psychological treatments are needed for pain. Study participants each came with a 5-hour visit on 4 separate occasions to the Clinical Research Center at Penn State. These visits varied only by the manipulation of emotions. To manipulate emotions, researchers had the participants to think, write, and talk about the recent feelings. You can have the current political situation or the current race issues that could potentially be something that angers you more or less. All right. Cannot get rid of that shadow behind me. Okay. After the emotion manipulation, acute pain was caused by pressing on tender or swollen joints of participants, such as what might be done during a routine clinical exam. Blood samples were then obtained at multiple points, including at baseline, 10 minutes, 1 hour, and 100 minutes after the pain stimulus. Alright, just gonna give up on that startup. Alright. There was no main effect of experimental condition. However, when participants reported greater anger than their own average, they showed elevated inflammation, Graham England said. These findings are in concordance with a few recent studies suggesting that emotional states can cause or contribute to specific patterns of physiological responses to stress or pain. The researchers also found that when negative emotion was experienced in the context of manipulation for a different emotion, for example, if participants felt sadness, when researchers were trying to get them to focus on angry feelings, they showed elevated levels of both inflammation and the stress hormone cortisol. So cortisol is very important to look at in response to this, but that would be more with the adrenal gland, right? The adrenal system, and specifically hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, as we might talk about in other broadcasts. Such works are important because more nuisance, understanding the role of emotion, psychological stress, and pain on inflammatory states may eventually help clarify novel clinical tools to treat inflammation and pain to help improve current pain management techniques. Though these findings relate specifically to patients with RA, said this future work can potentially inform other pain patients as well. All right. So that one was actually a fairly good article, but not one of the main articles that I think talk about that. But that was a good article, I would say. The next one that we want to do is look at this one here. Now we're just going down the alley. All right, one moment. Again. All right. Stress, inflammation, and immunity. And this is dealing with a nursing one. And I think I like this here because it goes through this. This is the specific article by, you can't see it here, but by Glasser 2005. It talks about that one in this article. The immune system is an intricate network consisting of processes, systems, cells, tissues, and organs that work together to defend the body against attacks by foreign invaders. Where the immune system has many individual components, such as passive, innate, or adaptive immunity, there is a direct correlation from outside influences on how efficient an immune system can or cannot work. Stress has both benefits and downfalls. Stress is an adaptive energy needed for growth and strengthening. We have evolved through fight or flight response, which provides the physical energy and mental focus to remove us from dangerous situations. And then we know that the examples of good stress, and that can affect the muscles or the vascular system to further strengthen, as the psychological stress needed to take an exam or pay attention to driving during bad weather, for instance. Some examples. When stress becomes chronic and mismanaged, it is detrimental to our health and well-being. Examples of unhealthy stress include inadequate recovery from physical, mental, and emotional stresses of any kind. This could be related to exercise, constant worrying, and repetitive thoughts of a negative nature, and even emotions such as depression and anxiety. Cleveland Clinic, and I believe we might look at this article later on. Prolonged stress leads to physiological levels of cortisol. We talked about that earlier. This alters the effectiveness of cortisol that regulates both the inflammatory and immune response because of decreased tissue sensitivity to cortisol. We're trying to look specifically again with let's see here. Let's move forward here. This one here. The way stress impacts the immune system can be assessed in numerous ways. Measurements of inflammatory markers like cytokines, a group of chemical messengers which affect the behavior of immune cells. The response by the immune system itself, including activation and advancement of the disease. Assessing the subject's inability to cope with stressors such as negative mood associated with general stress, anxiety, and depression, and types of life events that take place near the time of stressors. And this is interesting here as we take the vaccine for the flu and maybe even possibly COVID. It is believed that for vaccines to work, there needs to be both antibody and virus-specific T-cell response. Changes in immune responses by stress can negatively impact the antibody and T-cell responses to viral vaccines. Interesting. Research on medical students experiencing academic stress, which have been inoculated with hepatitis B, has shown that students who had less stress had stronger antibody and T-cell response. So maybe that's what it is in the first place, and because of the ways that the flu bug changes and maybe even COVID. I don't want to say too much about COVID, but let's just say the flu bug. Your own immune response through decreased stress or improve regulation of stress may be the key in your immunity, according to what it's saying here. All right. Same thing with pneumonial and meningitis and dealing with antibodies to the vaccine. Let's read that one as well too in this Glasser article 2005. Spousal caregivers of dementia to patients inoculated with influenza have exhibited a weaker antibody and T-cell response. Caregivers inoculated with the pneumococcal and meningitis produced lower levels of antibody to vaccines than control groups. As one can see, stress can have a negative impact on the various situations and cases of one's immune system. This highlights the importance of counseling patients on the importance of stress management in hopes of optimizing their immune system. All right, so let's go back and note the source of this is rn.com, and I believe earlier in our earlier study it was Medical Express, and before that was APA PsychNet as the sources for the articles. And I think there might be even one more that we've already covered on Choices Markets. That's more of a, Choices Markets. Now, let's go ahead now to the next article. Anger more harmful to health in older adults than sadness. Now, I wasn't going to include this article, but just because it deals with stress and sadness and such like that, I think it's going to be important to look at. And I just don't know what is the deal today with the shadows. It's just driving me batty. All right. Yeah, maybe that one will do. Okay, let's just go through this article. So perfecting the webcam. Actually, I'm getting kind of angry at that. It's a good example, isn't it? You know, just thinking about the flu vaccine, you know, I've done some research and I've, you know, looked at the things about that. I'm not going to talk about that because we don't have censorship on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, and everybody else is probably, you know, trying to control content in some fashion for not being false, if you know what I mean. But dealing with the flu vaccine, are you going to take that? And most people do, right? Especially if you have, you know, if you're a healthcare worker or if you're a child care worker or in education and you're dealing with people, right? So, you know, talking about anger in older adults, let's just talk about that. But just think about that as you take those vaccines, that it can be helpful to have a positive outlook. And for some people who are maybe even, I would not criticize them, but maybe weak-minded a little bit, and their immune response gets dropped by their own stressors that they can't control, or the lack of whatever, nutrition, sleep, rest, sunlight, vitamins and supplements that could be helpful, and herbs and spices, however else, in your nutrition, you're breathing your fresh air, getting the grounding and the earthing techniques and all that stuff. You might just be a little bit on the lazy side and go take your trick-or-treat candy and gorge in a corner somewhere with glee. Okay, you might be happy, but your immune system could a bit potentially be affected. So, the flu vaccine sometimes is good for that. Just as this also, anger, you know, you can't control anger by, you know, being inebriated at work or high, but, you know, the meditation is very helpful, and we've seen that mindfulness and meditation can be very helpful. And those people who are, as we listened to one of the, as I listened to one of the biohacking conferences just a couple of weeks ago, how meditation with monks and such, they can quickly get into that meditative state. Somebody gets under your skin, like at work, and then you can have that meditative state. You've practiced your meditation and your mindfulness, and you can quickly have a little bit of a grasp of that. All right. Now, meditation can be, in some situations, a spiritual type of activity. And when you engage in the spirit side of things, that can be very helpful also, with a belief in, and also plugging into that ultimate hack that we talked about last time we talked, I believe. That would be very helpful in our anger and anxiety and our sadness and stress. All right. Anger more harmful than older adults than younger adults than sadness, associated with increased inflammation, which can lead to chronic disease, the study says. All All right, and this article is SD, which is Science Daily, and they're referencing the American Psychological Association source here. Anger may be more harmful to older person's physical health than sadness, potentially increasing inflammation, which is associated with such chronic illnesses such as heart disease, arthritis, cancer, according to new research. And this actually is seen in those who are 80 years old and above. All right, so I have some family members that are in the 80s. All right, and we will meet one of them tomorrow who's just done a fabulous job at preparing our meal for tomorrow, and we will enjoy that. All right, so I'm probably not going to go through this article per se, because we have a lot of ones that we have to do. One with specifically dealing with actually, this shows how anger and other things can be helpful. So this is interesting. Anger is an energizing emotion that can help motivate people to pursue life goals. Said Barlow, younger seniors may be able to use that anger as fuel to overcome life's challenges and emerge age-related losses, and that can keep them healthier. Anger becomes problematic at adults once they reach age 80 years old, however, because that is when many experience irreversible losses and some of life's pleasures fall out of reach. All right. My dad still enjoys golf and watching tennis and enjoying politics. Interesting. The author suggests that education and therapy may help older adults reducing anger by regulating their emotions or by offering better coping strategies to manage the inevitable changes that accompany aging. If we better understand which negative emotions are harmful, not harmful, or even beneficial to older people, we can teach them how to cope with loss in a healthy way. This may help them to let go of their anger. All right. Now, oops, I didn't want that. All right, so let's look at this one here. This is from dailymail.com. And I'm not sure if I want Daily Mail, but it might be speaking specifically to an article that we might be looking for. All right, there's a lot of comments, but there is no article that it's referencing. So here's a few here, dealing with different things. Let's go through this article, okay? It does talk about a research article. It doesn't have the references. It says there's a professor, John Oxford, a virologist at Queen Mary's School of Medicine in London, that it refers to. And then it talks about researchers at Ohio State University recruited 98 healthy volunteers who underwent an anger assessment and then agreed to have minor burns, interesting, on one forearm to create a blister. For 8 days, the wounds were checked by the doctors to track the speed of the healing process. Those who were least able to control here's another one here. Their anger healed more slowly than those who kept their temper in check. That's interesting. The researchers also found that angry recruits had higher levels of cortisol in their blood, cortisol again, which could be a factor in delayed healing. So we should maybe even change this slide to maybe not necessarily the biochemistry with effective immunology. We should probably mention cortisol. You know, this is the biochemistry that is involved here, but there's also other elements too that we need to talk about. All right. Now we won't change that. Cortisol has been shown to disrupt the delivery compound called cytokines, which trigger the wound healing process. All right, we're not dealing with wounds per se, but we can in therapy. Perhaps not surprisingly, anger can have a deleterious effect on our emotional well-being. While some people experience an initial thrill, an anger outburst is usually followed by considerable remorse, says Annie Hinchcliffe. It can affect relationships, working lives, and self-esteem, but anger is not all bad. It can even boost your success at work. All right, so let's look. There was a even bigger study earlier that was talking about 670 minutes. Let's look at that. Anger and negative emotions are also bad for your lungs, so dealing with lungs, okay? Scientists at Harvard University in the US discovered this when they studied 670 men using the Cook-Medley hostility scale, a scoring system used by mental health experts to work out a person's anger levels. Over 8 years, the men had regular tests to assess changes in lung function. The result showed those with the highest hostility ratings had significantly worse lung capacity, increasing the risk of respiratory problems. And that might be interesting to note, especially if you have respiratory style types of diseases out there, pneumonia and the like. The results show that those with the highest hostility ratings had the significantly worse lung capacity. We read that. It is thought that the stress hormone could increase inflammation in the airways. All right. Other studies, keep them going above here. Others have shown that immune system can be suppressed by anger. Harvard University scientists asked healthy people to focus on two emotions: anger and compassion, while a key antibody called immunoglobulin A was measured. Immunoglobulin A is the first line of defense, acting as a protective coating for the cells against invading organisms. Just recalling an angry experience caused a 6-hour suppression of the immune system, while feelings of compassion boosted IgA levels significantly. All right, so that's little touches here and there of that article. Now, we've got two more, and we've got 8 minutes plus. Wow. We are going to go down to the wire. I'm going to try to keep my anger in check with my shadowing. Or maybe I need that quick drink this evening. My coconut juice. All right, dialogues in clinical neuroscience, affective immunology. What is that? What is that? That's the whole thing that we'll talk about, where emotions and the immune response converge. Affect and emotions are defined as an essential part of the process of the organism's interaction with stimuli. Similar to affect, the immune response is a tool the body uses to interact with the external environment. Thanks to the emotion and immunological responses, we can learn to distinguish between what we like and what we do not like to counter a broad range of challenges and to adjust the environment that we are living in. Recent compelling evidence has shown that emotional and immunological systems share more than the similarity of function. This review article will discuss the crosstalk between two systems and the need for new scientific areas of research called affective immunology. Research in this field will allow us to better understand and appreciate the immunological basis of mental disorders and the emotional side of immune diseases. Now, it doesn't specifically talk about pain in that intro, but let's continue on. Studies over the last few decades have provided sufficient evidence of similarities that overlap between the immune and emotional response. The majority of living beings use both systems to adjust dynamically ever-changing conditions of the external environment. Both systems can either be protective for the body if kept under control and detrimental to it when they are in a disarray. Despite the vast body of knowledge we have gathered the links between the two systems, there have been very few attempts to move the area of research from bench to bedside. This might be due to many causes, including the perceived impression of the world of immunology and that of psychology or psychiatry are completely different, if not polar opposites. All right, so here we go. I like this one here. This is the most important part of this article, at least for my understanding. One of the main aims of the review is to help overcome the sexism and to highlight the importance of these similarities in clinical settings. Indeed, I firmly believe that a deeper understanding of the cellular and molecular links between the emotion and immunological systems can lead to significant advances of translational research. I call this new field of research affective immunology, to distinguish it from the broader field of psychoneuroimmunology, I couldn't say that a while ago, and to specifically connect the immune response to emotions and behavior and vice versa. What is affective immunology and what are its aims? First and foremost, affective immunology is a framework of research based on two fundamental assumptions. Number one, the immune and emotional systems mirror each other, and number two, the immunological and emotional responses are dynamic, continuously changing. All right, I'm not going to just keep on rambling on, but let's go ahead and go to the most important aspects of immunity. So let me see if I can find that quickly. All right, this is the schematic. Someone who's in a healthy condition, when the stresses attack them, that they have an equal emotional and immune response. This is the ones that have the imbalance. It's more of a immune response that's affected, or the emotional response that's affected. The schematic representation is the link between the emotional and immunological systems in healthy and diseased conditions. In a normal basal state, top panel, the emotional and immunological responses are linked in with each other in equilibrium. In healthy conditions, the right panel, pathogens of a different nature change the environmental conditions, and significant life events prompt an adaptive response to help the host deal with the challenges. In patients suffering from emotional or immunological disorders, the same challenges cause an exacerbated dysfunctional compensatory immune or emotional response, respectively. Now, if we deal specifically with, well, we'll talk about stress maybe in further detail later on. Now, let's look specifically at anger in this situation. Anger. All right, no matches. Okay, so there's no one in here, but let's just talk about the immune response here. All right. I like this here, this last story here, because it kind of summarizes everything here. And let's find it here. It says the different hypotheses. This is kind of like the president having his story time. All right, so let's look at this here. Find it here at the end of this longer article. It's a proverb, I believe, a Janus proverb, and you've probably heard of this one before. Besides all the considerations for the future, I think that establishing the field of affective immunology might be useful for evaluating a large number of failed clinical trials of new therapies for immune and emotional disorders. Despite the scientific literature that has been cited in this and other articles, there are no trials for immunomodulatory drugs that can take into consideration the emotion states of the enrolled patients. Similarly, there are no trials for mental disorders that assess the immune repertoire of recruitment patterns of recruited patients. Therefore, one might wonder if these trials have failed, could have had entirely different outcomes if the participants were stratified according to their social, economic conditions, their personality, emotional well-being, and even their blood type. Okay, regardless of the validity of the hypothesis and ideas presented in this article, I hope that the readers of the dialogues in the clinical neuroscience will be convinced there is a need to look at the immune and emotional diseases in a different way. The new approach will consider the whole of the patient from his or her immune phenotype to his/her personality, environment, and lifestyle, essential in order to prevent basic experimental scientists and clinicians ending up like old blind men in the Jane parable below. Once upon a time, there lived 6 blind men in a village. One day, the villager told them, "Hey, there's an elephant in the village today." They had no idea what the elephant was. They decided, even though they would not be able to see it, let us go and feel it anyway. All of them went where the elephant was. Everyone went and touched the elephant. "Hey, the elephant is a pillar," said one man who touched his leg. "Oh no, it's like a rope," said the second man who touched its tail. "Oh no, it's like a thick branch of a tree," the third man says, who touched the trunk of the elephant. "It is like a big hand fan," said the fourth man who touched the ear of the elephant. "It's like a huge wall," said the fifth man who touched the belly of the elephant. "It's like a solid pipe," said the sixth man who touched the tusk of the elephant. They began to argue about the elephant, and every one of them insisted that he was right. It looked as if he were getting agitated. The wise man was passing by and he saw this, and he stopped and asked them, "What's the matter?" They said, "We cannot agree what the elephant is like." Each one of them told what he thought the elephant was like. The wise man calmly explained to them, "All of you are right. The reason every one of you is telling it differently is because each of you had touched a different part of the elephant. So actually the elephant has all the features that each of you have mentioned." So, what does that mean? That means even in this situation that we are in right now, politically, dealing with our own identity, we have to take the whole approach, everyone's approach. We need each other, all right? So we need each other. So this last article that we're going to have is going to be in a little different tone. This is one on Hopkins medicine, John Hopkins medicine. And we're going to close with this one here on forgiveness that your health depends on. All right? So whether, all right, where are we? Whether it's a simple spat with your spouse or long-held resentment towards your family member or friend, unresolved conflict can go deeper than you may realize. It may be affecting your physical health. The good news, studies have found that the act of forgiveness can reap huge rewards for your health, lowering the risk of heart attacks, improving cholesterol levels and sleep, and reducing pain, blood pressure, and anxiety levels, depression, and stress. The research pointed to an increase in forgiveness health connection as you age. There's enormous physical burden to being hurt and disappointed, said Karen Swartz, MD, medical director of the Mood Disorder of Adult Consultation Clinic at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Chronic anger puts you into a fight or flight mode, which results in numerous changes in your heart rate, blood pressure, and immune response. Those changes then increase the risk of depression, heart disease, diabetes, among other conditions. Forgiveness, however, calms the stress, leading to improved health. Can you learn to be more forgiving? Forgiving is not just about saying words. It is an active process in which you make conscious decisions to let negative feelings, whether the person deserves it or not. Swartz says, as you release the anger, resentment, and hostility, you begin to feel empathy, compassion, and sometimes even affection for the person who has wronged you. Sometimes you become closer to those people you argue with. Interesting. It is interesting. Studies have found that some people are just naturally more forgiving. Consequently, they tend to be more satisfied with their lives and have less depression, anxiety, stress, anger, and hostility. People who hang on to their grudges, however, are more likely to experience severe depressions, post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as other health conditions. But that doesn't mean that you can't train that they can't train themselves to act healthier in ways. In fact, 62% of American adults say they need more forgiveness in their personal lives, according to a survey of a nonprofit Fetzer Institute. Forgiveness, making forgiveness part of your life. So this is the practical. Forgiveness is the choice. Swartz says, you are choosing to offer compassion and empathy to a person who has wronged you. The following steps can help you develop a more forgiving attitude. So that you can read this article. It just talks about other things, reflect and remember. Empathize with the other person, forgive deeply, and that's just not at the surface. Let go of expectations, decide to forgive yourself, and there's a little bit of a video here that would be good to look at if we had the time. All right. Okay. Let's go back a page or two. Let's see here. We're looking at one that's more research-based. And there's so much on this topic, but we will move on. Oh, it's disappearing. So, as we close, we want to take a moment and think about more than just the perspective of the physiological. We want to look more than the sociological. We want to look more than the biological. We want actually to approach this on a different plane. We talked about forgiveness and the ability to forgive your neighbor, your friend, your coworker. I've held a lot of anger against you. What you do, what you mean, your actions, your words, your body language, they irk me, they irritate me, they get under my skin. And I've held this anger against you. To some effect, it's been helpful, but for some, it's been detrimental to my well-being. I might not be brave enough to tell you in real life, but I want to let it go. I do need to let it go. And in order for me to do that, I need to forgive myself and ask you to forgive me. So please forgive me and take my words and in the next few days my actions that even though we might not get along, that we need to be professional and healthy in our relationship in order for us to function in this world. I ask you to let me let my anger go. And with that, the anxiety, the stress, at times sadness, be relieved and affect my immune system in a way that I might be able to be in control of my inflammation and my pains and my own condition. And with this, may the cytokines and the cortisol and the chemistry and neurophysiology start to heal my body. Take this information. For those of you out there who are professional, who are out there dealing in the battlefield, trying to reduce people's pain and symptoms and sadness, and help us to turn another page, plug into a spiritual connection, because only that spiritual connection can give me the courage to forgive myself, because someone forgave me. If you know what I mean. Stay safe. Take care. Join me again tomorrow in our broadcast from the kitchen, and for further broadcasts in the future. Good night.